football, basketball, baseball, and more. Your source for ACC sports is ACC Nation. Available on podcast, streaming radio, and YouTube. Be sure to subscribe.
So when we started the season, Jason, Will, and myself, it was like, are we going to see any ACC teams in the tournament this year? And lo and behold, here we are. And Jason has lots explaining to do. Lots of explaining to do, Jason. This is ACC Nation. That's Will Ogenin. I'm Jim Quist. Jason Carmello with Big-Underdog.com. He's got a new bracket out, and we're going to talk about where ACC teams are in that bracket, plus where college basketball is heading overall, because there's a lot of exciting teams out there. And anytime we have Jason on, we want to talk about more than just the ACC. You want to get the big picture of what we may be looking at as we get closer and closer to March Madness. Jason, glad to have you on.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me, guys.
Let's talk a little about are you surprised? I think. I'm surprised. I'm still sitting here going, I can't fathom the fact that as we were talking before we got started again, about the last couple of years, ACC men's basketball has been kind of like hold your nose, and it hasn't been up to par. And I don't think anybody saw what was coming this year. I mean, Will is a big UVA fan, and I think he is shocked, but pleasantly so. We'll talk about the ACC teams here in just a moment, but I'm going to let Will take the reins here, and let's get into some college basketball, the big picture.
Thank you. And good, as always, Jason, it's good to chat with you. Let's get into it. Looking at I'm going to start with the one line. And one of the things that stands out when you compare your bracket to the selection committee's bracket is you have UConn in as the fourth number one seed, where the selection committee had Iowa State as the fourth number one seed. So tell us why you have UConn over Iowa State.
Yeah, the committee throughout the last 15, 20 years has been just forceful in a sense of major conference champions throughout the season end up on the one line, right? And so especially with a team like UConn with the pedigree they have, and we'll talk about some metrics and things like that. I think at the time, I had anticipated Iowa State. So when the reveal came out over the weekend, I had Iowa State. When they got beaten and UConn won, I kind of flip-flopped them. If a UConn team only has 3 losses at this stage and they're leading the Big East, which is down this year, must say, I think they're just slightly ahead of Iowa State. They don't have kind of the profile, but what they do have is UConn scheduled in the non-con, so they got the 9th best non-conference strength of schedule, whereas Iowa State has 123rd. And so what the committee has said is if you win a conference and you schedule in the non-con, then you get the benefit of the doubt. So that's why I have UConn slightly ahead of Iowa State. And, they both suffered, losses recently. Iowa State lost at TCU, which is not a very good loss. And then UConn home at Creighton. But again, it's the non-conference strength of schedule for UConn being in the top 10 that give them the benefit of the doubt.
Ahead of UConn on the one line is Arizona, who outside of the ACC is one of my favorite teams to watch. Now, they have been a little down lately. They did suffer a couple losses, but have turned around and beat BYU and Houston. They're currently without their star freshman, Koa Pete. Arizona, to me, feels like they're right. I think they're just slightly behind Duke and Michigan, who you have as your top 2 one seeds. I think Arizona's not too far behind them. What do you think of the Wildcats?
I completely agree. Arizona's fantastic. They're so big and physical, and they just dominate people on the glass. Arizona's model is really different than any other team in the country. They are intentional with pounding the ball inside and getting high percentage shots. I mean, we're talking about an offense is in the top 10 defense as well, but they shoot less than 5 or 6 3-pointers in games consistently. We're talking about winning Big 12 games against a top 10 team in Houston, and they made less than 3 threes in a game. I mean, that's almost absurd, right? So much of the basketball that we see is reliant on the 3-point shooting. I mean, that's why Louisville has a good day or a bad day, right? They are dependent upon the perimeter jump shots. And Arizona says, don't care. We're going to pound it inside. We're going to buck the trend. We're going to go against everything that everybody is saying. We're going to pound the ball inside. We're going to use our size. We're going to use our depth and gradually wear you down. And they've been incredibly successul with it. Arizona is big and physical and really fantastic. There's no shame in getting beat by Texas Tech and some of these high leverage teams in Kansas on Big Monday at Fog.
And I was actually just going to get into Houston here. They've lost 3 in a row. You still have them on the 2 line. Is this a case of I'm not going to penalize them much for losing at Iowa State to Arizona and to, basically losing to the greatest team of all time, which is a Kansas team on a Monday night?
That's exactly right. The biggest thing you can do when you're studying bracketology and these types of things is you can't be a prisoner of the moment. You have to realize that each data point is 1 of 30 or 1 of 32 is a metric that you're going to review throughout the year. Do they just happen to string them together? If those happened in early January, they moved past that and they won 12 in a row, we'd be saying, man, they are really on pace to get the end of the 1 line or the early 2 seed line, but they're not. And so you can only penalize people so much. The reality is Houston is fantastic. They really guard, they do all the things. And, Flemings as a freshman is great. But they're not as dynamic offensively as they've been in years past. And they don't have the depth of quality wins as years past. Now, we're saying all that. They're still going to be a 2 or 3 seed, which is incredible for Houston. But they don't have the depth of wins. Their best win is a home win against Texas Tech. And then after that, a win at BYU. They didn't cash in on Iowa State. They didn't cash in against Arizona. They haven't won those types of games. And so they're not finding a way. For all those people listening, Houston's not getting to the 1 line. So we can kind of drop that conversation. They might be able to hang on to the 2 line. They could very well end up at the front of the 3 line because they're not the same Houston so far. Their resume is not the Houston resume that we're accustomed to. That doesn't mean they can't, win a national title because I think they're getting a little bit better each game. But their schedule is going to ease up and they'll finish pretty strong. I'd say they probably end up as the 3rd or 4th of the 2 seeds.
At this point, do you feel like it's 5 teams for 4 going for the 4 1 seeds?
I think so. Well, Illinois was right there because, if you win at Mackey, right, if you win at Purdue and then Nebraska win on the road too, was fantastic. And they had UCLA dead to rights. And they decided at that point to only shoot 35-foot 3-point jump shots the last 10 minutes of the game, for which I don't understand. They're the biggest team in the country, along with Arizona. Really undisciplined play from a really good Illinois team, especially offensively. They were on the cusp, but you got to win a game against a bubble team like UCLA to hang in there on the 1 line. So I think that's right. I think ultimately, UConn has St. John's coming up, and it's at UConn. I think if UConn wins that game and then they finish out strong, I think UConn's going to end up with the last 1 seed. Iowa State an outside shot, but I think UConn's going to inherently have probably 2 less losses than Iowa State. And so I think that'll be a big play again. That the non-conference of UConn's going to factor in.
Jason, just a quick question for you. I'm looking at your 4 lines, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and looking at all the teams on there. Do you feel like this has been a much more evened out sort of season? These teams are just pounding the crap out of each other. Yeah. This is the type of college basketball I grew up with, and it was any given night, right? Yeah. And that seems to be what I'm seeing this year. But is that true with? I don't feel like I can go into the 5 line and say that totally. Yep. Because of Tennessee and Vanderbilt doing some things, but definitely 1, 2, 3, and 4. What do you think there?
I think that's well said, Jim. I think Duke, Michigan, and Arizona are ahead of the rest of the teams. I think, as Will mentioned, I think they're ahead of the rest of the teams. It doesn't mean they can't get beat. Doesn't mean they can't have a bad shooting night or whatever it may be. But from UConn through Alabama, right? So you're encapsulating in Illinois, or Purdue, Kansas, right? Is back and forth. I think that's a great example. Florida at times, Florida started out 4-5. Texas Tech, all these teams, Michigan State, they all have kind of good days and bad days. Kansas is the perfect example, right? Saturday at home at the Fog, they got whooped by Cincinnati. Then they get the Fog on a big Monday, self 40-0 on big Monday at home, and they beat Houston by 13. You're seeing right now, like you said, there's a lot of parity at that very high level. And if you're not ready to play, you're going to get beat. And especially when you get into the throes of February, like the light of March is starting to enter and there's some fatigue. And a lot of these freshmen are getting tired, right? You feel that. The light at the end of the tunnel is coming, but it's not quite there yet. This is where you get some lazy games. I mean, let's just be straight. USC at home with most of their roster intact at Oregon the other night in a game they had to have, they just didn't want to play. And Oregon beat them at USC. So you're seeing, if you're not ready to play, you're going to get beat. Michigan State at times is incredible, right? They defend, they guard, their athletic fears is, averages almost 10 assists a game. At other times, they're almost disinterested offensively. And so there's not a consistency among those teams. Doesn't mean they can't win the national title. And then you go to a team like Gonzaga, right? Who lost by 40 to Michigan in November and ran through the West Coast Conference, then lost at Portland. So even the Zags have been up and down more than they've been accustomed to in the last 10, 12 years.
Out of those teams, one through four, who's the most surprising team that you have in there right now?
I'd say Nebraska. I mean, Nebraska has been viewed over the last 5 to 8 years as an offensive ball club. But when you kind of peel back the layers of the onion, they've actually been really, really good defensively the last 3 or 4 years under Hoiberg. And they've gotten steadily better. They kept their whole roster. I mean, when I spoke with Hoiberg, last year, he basically said, like, they didn't have Mast. Mast got hurt. Their big guy got hurt. And he believed if they had them last year, they absolutely had an NCAA tournament roster. They were right on the bubble up until the end. I think they won the crown. They got him back. Frager is a wonderful freshman from Lincoln, and they just have all the parts and pieces. They have experience. They have depth. His son Hoiberg is one of the best defensive players in the country, probably the best glue guy in the country. And so I'd say Nebraska and just the overall season. For those of you that don't watch Nebraska a lot, they have an incredible home court advantage, Pinnacle Bank. So they win a lot of their home games, and a credit to them and their fans to create that environment to make it a tough place to play. I'd say Nebraska is the biggest surprise. On the 4 line, I'd say Virginia getting that high. Will, if we would have said Virginia's going to make the tournament, they're going to be on the back of the 9 line or the early part of the 10 line, say, yeah, that's about right. That's a really good season. And they're on the 4 line. They've been fantastic. Virginia's up there as a surprise as well.
So I have a friend who's who went to St. John's, and obviously he's a big St. John's fan. Here I am looking at the 5 line, and I'm going like, wow. Well, not what I would have expected this season. Tell us a little bit about St. John's.
Well, the problem with St. John's is there's a couple things going against St. John's. I think they're a very good team. Patino's obviously fantastic, and they're getting better by the day, which all of his teams do, right? They've done that throughout history. They did that. Heck, they did it at Iona when he was at Iona a handful of years ago. The problem with St. John's is they didn't have any really marquee big wins in the non-conference. They kind of missed out on all those, right? They played Alabama and they got beat. They played Kentucky, they got beat. They played Auburn, they got beat. And so they didn't cash in. And so there's not a depth of wins in the non-conference to stabilize it. And the Big East is down. Xavier and Creighton in the Big East and Providence, those teams are usually always good, especially Xavier and Creighton lately. They're not any good. And so there's not a depth. You've got Connecticut and you have Villanova, and everybody else stinks. And so the reality is that you can't accumulate a lot of wins. We call it kind of wins against the field. They're just not there to have. They also missed out on Iowa State in the non-con. So they struck out in the non-con. It's a weak Big East. So their climb, if you kind of step back, their climb started at about an 8 or 9 seed to kind of work their way up. And there's only so many marquee wins you can get. Whereas a team like Virginia, a lot of these teams stacked wins in the non-con. So they're starting at a 6 seed. So if they kind of keep playing well, they can march up to a 4. If people have a bias going into it, some people may have St. John's higher. The reality is that they've only beaten Connecticut and Villanova. Those are the only two teams that are going to make the tournament. They have 2 tournament wins. So, in some ways 5 is generous based on, they've only have 5 losses.
Well,
Yeah, let's stay in the 4 line. Let's talk Texas Tech real quick because they're an
Yeah.
interesting story because they obviously lost their star player JT Toppin for the season. The committee actually put them on the 4 line in their selection thing on Saturday as a result, but we don't really have much of a sample size to go off of without Toppin, but where do you stand with the Red Raiders right now?
Yeah, that's a great question, Will. So, um, in the year 2000, right, we kind of go back. Kenyon Martin was leading a Cincinnati team that was on pace to be either the best or second best team in the country. He was hurt against St. Louis in what was the Conference USA quarterfinals. And so they got beat. There was no games after it between Selection Sunday for Cincinnati and their seeding. And so the committee said, well, we don't know what to do. We're just going to drop Cincinnati a seed. So they were a 2 seed. Like, we don't know what to do. We're going to drop them a seed line. There were no games. Texas Tech has 6 regular season games and then the Big 12 tournament. And so there's enough, like you said, Will, there's enough data points to establish how they're going to play without him. I don't think you can fully kind of dock them because, of course, Toppin's fantastic, but you can't say they wouldn't have won without him, right? So I think what the committee will do, and they will, is they're going to dock them, for turning in their homework late. They're going to dock them a seed line now, and then they kind of go from there. They talked about possibly being a 3 seed. They moved them down to a 4, and now they'll just see where they are. You can see, though, when Caleb Wilson got hurt, right, Carolina was trying to find it early on. Now they're starting to settle in. So there's going to have to be a little bit of a grace period with Texas Tech. I'll say this. I think before Toppin got hurt, Tech was absolutely a top 5 or 6 team in the country. Now, people can say, what about these teams? If you go to Arizona and win, like, you are fantastic. If you can fend off a Houston team, you are fantastic. They were tough. They were physical. What Tech has, they have Christian Anderson's probably second team All-American point guard. Atwell's the best 3-point shooter in the country. So they have lots of roles and role players that were built around Toppin. Now, those guys have to lead. I still think they can absolutely get a top 5 seed in the tournament. I think they're good enough to do it. There's going to be an adjustment period. Toppin was last year's Big 12 Player of the Year, and this year might have been very well the same. I still think they have a chance to make a Sweet 16 or Elite 8. And if you get that far, you just never know. They do have a lot of skilled people. Don't forget about Anderson. He'll take on much more of the scoring load. But, it's really sad for college basketball because I think Tech was one of my favorite teams to watch because they had everybody fill in all their roles and they played really well as a team.
In a similar vein, BYU lost it's arguably their second at worst third best player, Richie Saunders, with a torn ACL as well.
Yeah.
And yeah, they have a little more of a sample size without him. They did lose to Arizona, which again, no shame. But they did beat Iowa State at home. So how much will BYU fall off the rest of the season?
I think they can point to that Iowa State win and say, "Hey, we're still going to be really, really good." BYU's missed out on so many, quad 1A, right? The top tier quad wins. They're, in that they're, 1 in 7, I think it is, right? They've really swung and missed, but against everybody else, they've been fantastic. They're just trending inherently towards that 5 or 6 line, which is a wonderful season, but not quite what it should be. I don't think they're going to get dinged nearly as much for Saunders, especially because they were able to get that Iowa State win. I think they're a little bit safer in their pick. I don't see them getting dinged at the end, because their resume wasn't quite as strong anyway. And to be honest, right around that 6 line is where things start to break. The resumes get drastically different on the back of the 6 line. And they're inside that cut line. So I think they'll probably be a 5 or 6 seed.
Down on the 7 line is probably one of the better stories in all of the college basketball this season, and that's St. Louis. They've only lost twice this season. One of them was on a buzzer beater to was Stanford, I believe, at the end of the season, and then one other loss. And I know at last check they were getting a bit of a game from Dayton. They're actually down 19 as we speak.
Yep.
The Billikens, what do we need to know about them?
Yeah, so John Schertz, He was at Indiana State 2 years ago when Robbie Avila and who's now at St. Louis with him, when Indiana State was absolutely fantastic and threatened, right? Drake beat him, DeVries and Drake beat them in the Missouri Valley. I was fortunate enough to kind of go watch that courtside, and Indiana State played at the same pace, and they are fantastic offensively. They had a bumpy year last year, but he was able to institute it. They're top 15 in the country in pace, so they get up and down the court. They are the nation's best 3-point shooting team, and they shoot over 40%. They shoot 40, almost 42% from three. So they run up and down the court. They can really shoot threes. The second highest in field goal percentage, effective field goal percentage. They really score, and their defense has been top 25. So this is not a joke. Like, this isn't like, well, they haven't played anybody, they're not very good. Obviously, they're struggling at Dayton. Road games are hard, and Dayton's a tough place to play. But statistically, they are a handful because they can really score and shoot the ball. And that was the offense he had at Indiana State, and he's brought it through. It just took him a little while, but he's done a really good job at St. Louis. He's going to be a name. Sure, it's that. Does he want to stay there and build that into a powerhouse, right? Because he knows he can make the tournament every year there, and he has as good or better facilities than anybody else, or does he try to chase the high major job? That'll be the question.
The Mountain West has been, I would say, for all intents and purposes, pretty down this season.
Yeah.
But a team that has really stood out is Utah State, a team that's sitting in 23-4 on the season. And Utah State tends to be one of those schools where a lot of coaches go there and just immediately have success. And obviously, Jared Calhoun, no exception to that rule. What do we need to know about the Aggies there?
Yeah, Calhoun's fantastic. I've been singing his praises since he was at Youngstown State. I mean, he almost took Youngstown State to the NCAA tournament, which is an incredible feat. They've never made it. Like you said, they've had such a nice lineage over the last 10 years. Odom and such. Mountain West is down, but that doesn't mean that they still don't have the chance at multiple bids. With Utah State, they're a top 20 offense and a top 35 or so defense, and they really score the ball. Now, they don't play at the same pace as St. Louis. They'll kind of be a much more methodical, but they're big, they're physical, they're strong, and they can really, really score the ball. And they are always prepared. I was able to watch Utah State in person last year, and the preparation and defensive schemes that Calhoun has is top notch. I mean, he is a high major coach dominating a really good conference in the Mountain West. He, just like we mentioned with Shirts, I don't know how someone's not going to throw a bag at him and try to pry him away. I mean, it's time for him to go, potentially, if he wants to take off. New Mexico, San Diego State, if we kind of zoom out to the Mountain West, New Mexico and San Diego State are hanging in there. They're kind of hanging around. They don't have the depth of the conference. Nevada isn't quite as good this year. New Mexico and both San Diego State are just on the cusp. I think New Mexico is slightly ahead of San Diego State. There's a chance they both could get in. And of course, it's probably going to be a bid thief, right, League, where one of those teams advances, maybe even Colorado State. Boise State always gets better. Leon Rice is one of the best coaches in the country at Boise State. So if anybody other than Utah State wins, that could be a bid that's stolen.
I'm looking at the 8 line, and I have questions about three of the 4 teams here. So
you're not the only one with questions about. Once we get to the 8 line, some years the 8's really solid. This year you could almost put the name in the hat, Jim, from 8 to the next 4 out, and say like it's really the difference. I mean, truly, the difference in probably the 9 seed line and Seton Hall, the 6th team out, is one major win. Sorry, I interrupted you.
No. that took the ball and ran with it. I just that's a great point, because there's a definite drop off here. We start seeing, it's been sort of easing since I looked at number 5 and Tennessee and Vandy and some of the stuff that's going on with them. And I've just started thinking to myself, boy, there's a significant slide going on here. And as we go down the line here, it's just, Yeah, a lot of questions. And as you point out, you get into the 9 line. You got SMU and Clemson. There's a team that is a big question mark. I don't know what to think about them.
Yeah, even on the 8 line, we'll get to Clemson here in a sec. I mean, on the 8 line, you have a team like UCF, Central Florida, who's having a fantastic season. But like when you really dig into, how are they operating, right? Because they were able to beat Texas Tech and they were able to beat Kansas early in the year, and Texas A&M has been good. So that was a big coup early in the season. But like UCF has the 113th best defense in the country, and they might wear a home jersey in the NCAA tournament. 113th defensively. That's absurd, right? Of course they can score, but they're winning close games. And so sometimes it's just that simple. Like, can you win close games? And truly, it's a couple games. And you don't have to be great, but if you have 4 wins against the field, 4 right now, you're safely in the NCAA tournament. 4 wins against the field. Isn't that crazy? And so UCF's got, 3, maybe 4 if TCU makes it, and they might wear a home jersey. Clemson is one of the most fascinating cases. So we kind of settle into an ACC team here. So Clemson, they're 20-4, right? 2 weeks ago, they're 20-4. They are cruising. And everybody's like, all right, so Clemson's awesome. And, they had a non-conference strength schedule 79, so that's good, right? The double digits, that's good. And, they're cruising on the road, like whatever. And they've got 3 quad 1 wins, so we're good there, and 7 quad 2. Okay, so we're good, right? Well, maybe not. Clemson's, I'm going to read you Clemson's best wins here. So we're going to go through, again, keep in mind, Clemson has lost 4 in a row, 3 of those 4 to non-tournament teams. Okay. Now they're 20-8, so it still sounds good, but the 20-win marker is not a guarantee. So they're 20-8. Their best win from a net standpoint is a neutral court win over Georgia, who will likely make the tournament, maybe a 9 or 10 seed. Okay. They won at Cal. That's their second best win at Cal, which might make the tournament, but probably not. Then at Stanford, they will not make the tournament. Then they beat SMU and Miami at home. That's it. That's all they've got. Now, they don't really have any horrible losses, but they lost at Georgia Tech and they lost at home to Florida State, quad 2 losses. So what I'm saying is this, like, that's a resume of a team that everybody thought was safe a little while ago. That's 4 in a row. Are they going to beat Louisville at home? Are they going to win at UNC? If not, that's 6 in a row, and that's 20-10. And then they better beat Georgia Tech at home. So I guess what I'm saying is like it gets very volatile right around that 8 line and up. And Clemson is a team that their record was so gaudy that like everybody felt that they were really good, but their offensive efficiency numbers have tanked over the last 2 or 3 weeks. They're up to almost the 75th offense in the country. They can't rebound at all, like at all offensively. They're getting killed on the glass, and their pace of play is 340th out of 365. So the game is so slow and there's not a lot of margin of error. That's what you see with Iowa sometimes. They're almost dead last in the country. When you play at that pace, then you are at the mercy of a coin flip late in games because there's only so many possessions. So if you don't offensive rebound, get extra shots, and you play that slow pace, sometimes you play the toll. And like, I'm going to go on a tangent here. That's why Wisconsin has changed how they play. Wisconsin, everybody thinks they're methodical and prodding. Not anymore. Michigan State, not anymore. Those teams want to get up. They want to go. They want to shoot threes. Like a lot of these, even coaches that have been around a while, are changing their formula because they're seeing that these games get really volatile late when there's only a handful of possessions. So Clemson is not nearly as safe as people think they are. There is absolutely a path where they're sweating if they have to go to Dayton or not. There's absolutely a path, which is kind of crazy if you think about it 3 weeks ago.
The only thing I can see that helps them is a really good performance in the ACC tournament.
Yep. Yeah, it's not the end of the world if they lose to Louisville, and it's not the end of the world if they beat North Carolina, but they have to beat Georgia Tech.
Right.
Which, I mean, they should be able to do. That should keep them in the tournament. So I think they make the tournament, but I think that could be a team where everybody raises their eyebrows like, I thought they'd be like an 8 or 9 seed, and then they get stuck on the back of the 10 line. You're like, that's weird. They got a bad draw when actually, like, no, they really didn't get a bad draw.
No, it's a very accurate draw.
That's right.
In
That's
fact,
right.
I'm looking a little bit further down actually at this point, based upon what you're laying out here scenario wise. Will, I'm going to put it back in your court.
Let's do it. And let's get into the Miami of Ohio discussion,
Oh,
Jason.
here we go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
let's go. At currently undefeated, obviously
Yeah.
27-0, and
Yeah.
they will be 28-0 as they are up 11 with about
Yeah.
a minute left. So, barring something catastrophic, they're going to go to 28-0. Let's get into the question.
Yeah.
How many times can they lose and feel safe?
All right. I got to watch what I say. My brother's a Red Hawk. I'm just kidding. All right, so let's take this into parts and pieces. There are 300, when I do metrics and and I drop those on you guys, there are 365 Division 1 college basketball programs. Okay? 365. Their non-conference strength of schedule is 364.
God.
Okay? And so that is a big strike. We talked about like why is UConn ahead of some of these teams? Well, they're 9. You determine so much of your non-conference schedule. Now, you don't know exactly how teams are going to be, but by and large, you have some idea if they're going to be competitive. Now, you say, well, if you're Travis Steele, he's come out lately because he's trying to get out ahead of this if they get beat and say, well, no, we knew we were going to have a good roster. We knew we were experienced. We had just about everybody coming back. Nobody wanted to play us. Like high majors will not play us. So what do you want us to do? I understand that, but I also understand it shouldn't be 364. Right? Like someone in the hundreds would be willing to play you. With that said, to be kind of succinct in the answer, I think they can lose a regular season game and lose in the MAC. I think if they have on Selection Sunday, if they have 2 losses or less, they make the tournament. I think if they have 3 losses, they don't make the tournament. I think they're going to let them have 1. And if they lose in the MAC to Akron or Kent State or Ohio, I still think they get in. I think again, if it's 2, 1, or 0, they're in. Obviously 0, they would win. And here's why. The NCAA Tournament Committee over the last couple of years has been emphatic on this WAB, right? Wins above the bubble. So we kind of keep it really simple for all of you that aren't necessarily have your nose in all the metrics. That is the number of wins that team has over a quote unquote average bubble team. So they pick like a middle range bubble team and the number of wins. So you want your WAB, you want your number higher, right? Miami of Ohio is tracing in at 35. That's really, really good for them. That's ahead of Georgia, Clemson, UCLA, Auburn, A&M, Missouri, Indiana, and Texas. That's ahead of those teams in the metric that says how many wins. Now, if they stumble and they lose, right, they'll drop down that. But as of now, if you're in the top 40 of the wins above bubble over the last 3 years, you make the tournament, period. So if your team is wondering if you're on the bubble, that's a huge metric to be in is the wins above bubble. I think they're safe enough now. They're going to do it. No team since they've expanded in 1985 has not made the tournament with 2 or less losses. Like there's just all this kind of history built into this. If they get 3 losses, they're not going to make it. 1 or 2, they'll make it.
And to follow up on the point Jason just made about Miami Ohio's non-conference schedule, they played 3 non-Division I teams. So
Yeah.
either they didn't try, or he's right, nobody tried to schedule them. But one of the teams you have in one of the playing games is probably no one is even thinking about, and that's Santa Clara.
Yeah.
Ranked 35th in KenPom. They actually
Yeah.
are 23-6. Herb Sandek, folks,
Yeah.
we know him out here at ACC Nation, is doing a really good job with this team. They have a 1-point loss to St. Louis on their resume. They obviously lost twice to Gonzaga. But what do we need to know about the Santa Clara team if they have a chance of making this tournament?
Yeah, Herb Sendek's a really good coach, and he's still around, right? People thought, he retired. He's out there. Santa Clara's been knocking on the door the last handful of years. They've had some really good prospects that have played in the pros. Santa Clara is in the top 25 offensively and the top 55 defensively. When you get to this part of the season, if you have a West Coast Conference team and you're not Gonzaga or St. Mary's and you're doing that, you are fantastic. Like you are really, really good. And they are really, really skilled offensively. The problem with Santa Clara's resume is Loyola Chicago. So on a fateful day of right before Christmas on December 20th, they played a neutral court game to Loyola Chicago, and they got beat by basket. And Loyola Chicago is 310 out of 365. So there's like quad losses. That's 4, only because there's not a quad 8 loss. Like, I mean, that's a horrific loss. So that is kind of weighing down their profile. Without that, they'd be in really, really good shape. Their chance to make the tournament is probably really simple. If they can go to St. Mary's later this week and win, then they're probably gonna make the tournament. Like, they need one more big thing, because the metrics say they're really good. The wins above bubbles 41, so it's hanging in there really well. Like you said, Ken Palm's 35. The metrics say this team is really skilled, especially offensively, and can play. The resume's bumpy, right? They beat St. Mary's at home. They need a sweep against St. Mary's.
So looking at your teams out, and this is something we actually had somebody comment on our ACC Nation TikTok with this question, and I tried to give the best answer I could, and I'm just going to put the ball in your court for this answer. Okay.
All right.
So the person was asking me to compare Cal and Virginia Tech as to why Virginia Tech is ahead of a lot of ahead of Cal in a lot of people's resumes or on their brackets. And the answer I give is that while I don't think there's a lot different between the two, I think the one thing that stands out was Virginia Tech has a much better win than anything Cal has. That home win of Virginia is probably going to carry them, more than even though Cal has some nice wins. The UCLA win looks good, the Miami win looks good, but and you actually are the other way, if I'm reading this correct. You actually have Cal ahead of Virginia Tech. But why do you think a lot of bracketologists have Virginia Tech ahead of Cal?
I think what scares people with Cal are two things, actually 3 things. Their non-conference strength of schedule is 331. So like we were just talking about. I mean, if it starts with a 3 and you're a major conference thing, then a major conference team, then you have you didn't lock your door. Like, you're just like, all right, so you have given yourself you've given the committee the ability to leave you out because you chose not to schedule. And the NCAA Tournament Committee has said, we talked about this in the past, we want our sport to be relevant in November, December. So if you choose not to schedule, you're not helping our sport, then don't come back in March and wonder why you got left out. Again, 331, that's a big deal. Also, the metrics say Cal isn't very good. Like, offensively, they're 78. Defensively, they're 71. If you don't have one of your metrics be in the top 50, it's hard to make the NCAA tournament. Like, those are staggering statistical numbers, which means they're somehow winning a lot of close games. Offensively, they've kind of hung in there, and made some 3-point shots. And they've been fortunate. Let's be straight about Cal. They've been very fortunate. In Ken Palm, they are the nation's #1 free throw defensive team. Let me say that again. #1 free throw defense. You can't play defense, right? They've been fortunate. Teams have missed free throws, especially late in games, and led to their success. They're 321st offensive rebounding, 256 offensive 2-point shot. Like, their metrics say they're not that good, but they have some good wins. Last thing I'll say for Cal, which is a struggle, they're 4-5. Like, they beat UCLA, Miami, North Carolina, Stanford on the road. That's the good. The bad news is they only have one quadrant 2, right? One quadrant 2 win. And so against the first 2 quads, they're 5-8. They're under 500 in the first 2 quads. It's hard to make the tournament that way historically. So that's the thing. They're non-conference, their metrics, and then they just don't have the depth of wins. They have some high-profile ones, but not the depth. Virginia Tech, their non-conference is 212. Again, you don't really want to start with a 200 either, but it's a little bit better. Like you said, Clemson and Virginia wins are really, really good. But they're only 2-8. There's only 2-8, and they've had such a hard schedule lately. Can they win at North Carolina or Virginia? They're going to need at least one more of those, right, to get in. And their metrics as well are alarming too. Their wins above bubbles in the 50s, and that's not a positive sign so far. Ken Palm's got him 56. So I think both of these teams have won more games than I think statistically they probably should have. They've been fortunate to win as many games as they have. I think the road and neutral, Virginia Tech's under 500 in road and neutral games, which is also kind of a tough way to make the tournament. So I would say that Virginia Tech has a better chance to make the tournament because their non-conference strength of schedule was a little bit better, and they still have some really, really big games that they could kind of pull out. Cal has SMU at home and then landmine games. Pitt at home, at Georgia Tech, at Wake. So there's really not much to gain there. Although the recipe for all these teams to make the tournament is win at Wake because they're just inside the top 75, so you get a quad one win, even though Wake's not a quad one team. But I'd say Virginia Tech's slightly higher chance. Right now, Cal's a little bit ahead of them. But they're both not making the tournament. There is a scenario where Virginia Tech gets in. I think it's going to be tough for Cal to get in. These metrics in the non-conference are really tough. I think Virginia Tech has a higher chance to get in. But they're going to have to win either at North Carolina or at Virginia or both.
Wow. Bad news.
Yeah.
Hey, just rounding up things here, all of the ACC teams, your overall impression about how these teams have been performing and what you're seeing this year out of the conference?
I think for the ACC, I don't know that there's a scenario where it could have went better, right? And we talked before, are they going to get – the last couple of years, it's been 5, 5, and 4, right, in terms of bids. And now we're talking about 8 teams are probably pretty much locked in to make the tournament. That's fantastic, right? Are you going to get a 9th, 10th? Probably not. We knew Louisville would be pretty good, right? We thought NC State might be a little bit better than this, but they're still going to make the tournament. Obviously, Carolina and Duke were going to be really, really good. But it's that layer Virginia and Miami, right, came out of nowhere. And what you saw is even teams like Wake, right, that we're kind of kidding around about, were pretty good in the non-con to the point where now that's still a quad one win if you go to Wake and win. And so there haven't been the teams that just drag things down. Even at Syracuse is a quad one win. So they're kind of feeding the machine. The Big East doesn't get to do that because all their teams are below the top 75, so they don't get these road quad one wins. And so they're feeding the machine that is win at Stanford, quad one, right? Like all these teams have been good enough to hang in the top 75, and they're helping each other now with their resumes in terms of kind of the resume-based metrics. The issue has been, like, if you look at the predictive metrics on the back end, they're a little dicey, right? The teams maybe fortunate to be there, but from an ACC, you couldn't ask for 8 or 9. Like that is the best case scenario. To be having a conversation about Mark Madsen and Cal legitimately making the tournament right before March, that's incredible. I mean, Cal couldn't have had a better year. To a certain extent, Stanford could not have had a better year. The only team that's still incredibly disappointing is Syracuse, right? I think Syracuse thought this year they'd be a little bit better with Carmello Anthony's son. They haven't been there, but all in all, a team like Virginia coming back to prominence, and they're going to be good for a while. Like Odom's going to be a good coach there. That's going to be a good fit. So there you go, Will. You couldn't ask for a better season. Virginia Tech was always going to be on the bubble, right? And so that was always going to happen. The fate was always going to have it. But for Cal and Miami to be this good is incredible. Like that was a complete surprise. So kudos to them.
And the one team that I'm disappointed in overall, well, there's 2 teams. Overall, Louisville. I don't know what happened there, but it happened. The other team, which I don't think anybody really expected to do anything spectacular, was Wake Forest. And I understand Steve got his contract renewed or extended. Yeah. So there's some faith at Wake Forest in their coach. So must be doing something right. Yeah,
they always seem like they're one piece away. You know what I mean? Wake, right? Always competitive, always play hard, always prepared. Forbes is great, but they always seem like one piece away. And then you look at it and you're like, Wake, when you watch the teams play, Wake should be better than Virginia Tech, right? Like Wake's got better players. And then you look at it and you're like, how's Virginia Tech? They might make the tournament. And Wake's on the periphery of the bubble, a little further behind. So credit to Mike Young. Forbes got the vote of confidence, but they're going to need to make the tournament next year or two, or that, I think they're starting to invest much more resources than they used to there. So, but it's getting more competitive, right? Like, hey, Miami might be good now, so now you got to deal with Lucas in Miami. I tell you what, I also like what I'm seeing from Florida State. They're starting to play better. Their system, the new coach and the new system was always going to take some time to come in, but they're playing hard and they're a handful right now. Florida State and the Big 12 version is Cincinnati. Those teams are playing hard right now. Those coaches are dialing up. Some of these people want to keep their jobs. So
some great pointers there on Florida State and Miami, because those two teams definitely you can tell that they're coming along, and I hope Wake Forest wakes up and starts to deliver on their end, because it how long can you go like that without making some changes? So anyway, Will, any final thoughts and questions?
I'll do one more real quick. Who is someone, a team from your 12 line down that we should really be keeping an eye on as someone that could maybe be the team that we didn't get last year, the Cinderella?
Yeah, I love Yale. I love Yale. So here's why. They're 309th in pace of play. So the game is going to have such limited possessions in an NCAA tournament game. They're either going to be a 12 or a 13 seed if they win the Ivy League. And they're the second best 3-point shooting team in the country. Like I said, we talked about St. Louis being the first. They're second in the country. So again, they're going to shoot over 40% from three. And there's very limited possessions. And if they get out ahead of you 18-8 after the under 12 in the first half, and you're like, what's going on here? Clock's running. Then you start to feel the pressure. Like, that's how upsets happen.
Yep.
And so I think Yale is a very, very good team, very well coached. High Point's fantastic as well. So High Point's cruising along. They're 26-5. I mean, they're really good on both sides of the ball. They're a very dangerous team. So I'd keep an eye on High Point as well.
All right, thank you, sir. The most recent bracket, the 24th of February. That's what we're talking about. It's Jason Carmello at big-underdog.com. Make sure you check that out. We're going to share a link on our social media to his site later, and including this podcast and on YouTube. And make sure that you check out Will over at TikTok, because as he mentioned earlier, he's answering questions and he's posting some very interesting content over there as well. So we appreciate you, Jason. As always, it comes to talking basketball, I'm just going to sit here and listen, because it's good, especially when you two guys get going. It's all good.
Hey, lots of positive vibes with the ACC this year. And by the way, we went through this whole podcast so far, I have to bring it up without Hubert Davis reference and North Carolina. Really kind of somehow Carolina's flying below the radar, right?
You have now ruined it.
No, they're checking enough boxes to kind of keep everybody kind of in line, right? They've been really, really good at home. And we didn't talk about Duke a whole lot. Duke's obviously fantastic. Boozer's probably going to be National Player of the Year. Obviously, the win over Michigan is a tremendous win. I think Michigan is one of the most complete teams that I've seen in the last 10 or 15 years. I mean, they are fantastic. Michigan is fantastic, and Dusty May might be the best all around coach in the country. So, Duke's right there. They're the inside track for the overall number one, and Hubert Davis is doing enough to keep people quiet, I think, right? Another year, right?
For the moment. Yeah.
For now.
Yeah, for now.
And look, I don't wish ill on Hubert. I really don't, but gosh almighty, there's got to be some consistency there, and because that's only going to last so long that people will put up with the inconsistency. Yeah. So, and I really think they're at that point. So we'll see.
They're right on the edge, right? They're right on the edge. Good games and bad games. So
it's ridiculous.
Thank you guys so much for having me.
Yeah. Thank you for
as always,
coming on and joining us, man. Appreciate it as always. Good talking to you.
All right. Be well. Thanks, guys.
You too.
Your source for ACC sports is accnation.net. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, X, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit, and Blue Sky. For more content, be sure to subscribe.